Well, hello again. Welcome to Horror in Detail. Today we are going to share Wendigo and Skinwalker encounter stories. First story. I never should have said it. Never make a decision over drinks. If we all had been sober, maybe we never would have agreed to go to the cabin. We would have never been there, and I would have never. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Our fateful decision was made on a Friday night in a packed Mexican restaurant. It was the first time that our friend group had all been in one place since high school graduation 7 years earlier. There were 7 of us: Megan, Ember, Ricky, Ella, Margaret, Kenny, and me. Most of us had grown distant, following different paths. Megan and Ember, my closest friends, were the only people who I had seen with regularity over the years. We were a lively bunch at the restaurant. After a period of hugs, how are yous, and several baskets of chips, we had finally come to a natural lull in the conversation. This was all Megan needed to speak up. So, I have an idea. It's kind of crazy, so promise to hear me out first. She paused, looking at all our reactions. To those who didn't know her as well as I did, she looked innocent with her wide eyes and smile. I knew this innocent act very well, just as I also knew she was about to get her way. I covered my smile with a sip of my marg. Okay, Margaret trailed off, glancing at Kenny. Ella and Ricky also exchanged looks, trying to gauge what was about to happen. Ember and I remained silent. Okay, so we're all home for the weekend, right? She looked around, imploring everyone to answer. There were nods of agreement around the table. Megan beamed. Excellent. Okay, so here's my idea. She paused again for dramatic effect. Out of the corner of my eyes, I saw Kenny rolling her eyes. I don't want this to be the only thing we do this weekend. We haven't seen each other in forever. We really need to make this weekend count. No one said anything, waiting for her to continue. Feeling loose from the alcohol and in the name of support, I chimed in. What do you suggest? I asked. Megan tossed her hair over her shoulder. Let's rent a cabin for tomorrow night. Everyone froze, unsure of what to say or do. I was surprised as well. She hadn't said anything about a cabin on the ride over here. I tried to make eye contact with Ember to see if she had been forewarned. Ember looked just as puzzled as the rest of us. A cabin? Ella questioned. Could we even find one this close to when we want to leave? And one that's affordable? Ricky chimed in, twisting a dark curl around her finger absent-mindedly. Some of us are broke. My eyes darted over to Megan. I was fully expecting her to be annoyed, but she looked serene, as if she had expected these questions and embraced them. Well, I actually did some looking earlier, and there is a place. She smirked. She was very confident, and it was odd. Of course, I didn't want her to be upset, but I could tell this was different. There was no part of her that thought we'd say no. My curiosity was piqued. Megan pulled out her phone and, after a myriad of tapping noises, began reading. Safe haven cabins, peace, refuge, and relaxation. It sleeps 8, has 3 bedrooms and bathrooms, a pull-out couch, Wi-Fi, smart TVs, a grill, a fire pit, and a hot tub. She grinned. No one really seemed moved by the hot tub revelation, much to Megan's annoyance. Come on, guys, just imagine it. There are woods all around it, and no neighbors for miles. We can literally be as loud and obnoxious as we want. And we have a hot tub, hello? Megan picked up her margarita. Imagine relaxing in the hot water, drinking a couple of these, and listening to the relaxing sounds of nature. We deserve a relaxing weekend. I could tell that she was softening everyone up. I could already picture myself in the hot tub, and wonders the jets might do on my knotted muscles. Okay, but how much is it? Ember asked. And how did you even find this place? Megan seemed like she was glowing. I knew this would be the kicker. It's completely free. She smirked. Free? Kenny asked, snottily. How can that cabin possibly be free? Megan's smile turned sharp. I was getting there. She said icily. My coworker and her family rented it out for the week, but sadly they're going to have to leave tomorrow morning. Some emergency came up. She didn't want the extra night to go to waste. She asked if I wanted to take some friends up there to enjoy it for the night. As long as we leave at 11 on Sunday and follow all the leaving instructions, the owner will never know. Megan passed her phone around, letting us swipe through the pictures of the cabin her coworker sent her. It was charming, wooden, and rustic. It certainly looked secluded and private. The amenities were all new, and it certainly looked spacious enough for the 7 of us. I couldn't find a fault with it. I could tell everyone was on board now as the phone was passed around. Even Kenny, who always had something to say, had nothing to comment. All we'll have to pay for is the gas to get there and whatever food and drinks we want to bring. Megan looked at everyone's faces, trying to make eye contact with everyone. A tactic she learned in business school to close a deal. So are you guys in? She asked as she sat her phone back down. Megan picked up her marg and held it in the center of the table. Rachel? She asked me, begging me to back her up with her eyes. My veins buzzed with alcohol, and I scrambled to come up with any reason why it wouldn't work out. I could think of nothing. I think it sounds like an amazing deal. I'd be down, I said, trying to signal Ember to agree with my eyes. I took my own marg and held it next to Megan's. Yeah, I'd be down too. Ember agreed, clinking her glass with ours. Slowly, everyone else's margaritas appeared in the circle. Megan looked like a kid on Christmas. Cheers. She beamed. I ignored the slight twisting in my gut that maybe something wasn't right as we all drank. It was probably just the alcohol settling. As it turned out, the cabin was a pretty good distance away from us. Our group piled into 2 cars, mine and Ella's. I took Megan and Ember in the coolers, while Ella took Ricky, Margaret, and Kenny in her larger car. The drive was mostly interstate until we were an hour away. The roads twisted through the mountains. They were flanked with beautiful orange and red trees. Discarded leaves danced in the wind as we drove by. It was an idyllic fall scene, filled with golden sunlight. The car thermometer showed 60 degrees. A good omen. The car had naturally grown quiet after the first hour of the trip, and to fill the silence, Megan had put on a podcast. The 3 of us had always been interested in the supernatural, and there was nothing like some spooky stories to get us in the mood. The calming voices combined with the gentle motion of the car had been all it took for Ember and Megan to fall asleep. I was the only one listening when the episode changed. It was an episode where people submitted their own stories and experiences. The first few were interesting enough, but it was the third that piqued my interest. The woman in the story detailed her experience during a cabin trip. A very strange but not unwelcome coincidence. It had started like all typical cabin trips do, with settling in and unpacking and assigning rooms. Their trip was normal until the woman went outside that night. She was throwing away the garbage when she heard it. Her friend's voice from the tree line urging her to come help. She had frozen, sure that her friend was inside at the table. She called for her friend, but all she got in response was the same plea for help. The silence of the night had grown oppressive around her. She strained to even hear an insect. It begged her for help again. She peeked through the back door to confirm her suspicions. And sure enough, there her friend sat playing cards with the rest of them. The woman ran back inside and told her friends what she had experienced. They had laughed at her for being spooked and maybe overhearing their conversation through the walls. But the woman knew it was something else. She called it a Wendigo. A Wendigo is like super dangerous. One of the podcasters said, I would literally be so freaked. Oh my God, Kate, we're not supposed to say the name. That literally summons them. The podcaster, Kate, gasped and made a show of freaking out. Oh my God, I feel like it's watching me now. They soon moved on to the next story, but my skin was crawling. There was a tug in my gut as I looked at the woods we were driving through. They were dense, thick. Who knows what could be hiding in them? The car hit a large hole in the road and jerked me out of my reverie. I was being absolutely ridiculous. There were no such thing as a Wendigo. The woman probably made up that story just so they'd read it. Everything would be fine. The cabin looked exactly like the pictures. It was charming and spacious, and Megan's coworker had left it in pristine order. We made quick work of setting up and deciding rooms. Megan and I decided to share a room. Ember would take the twin upstairs, Kenny and Margaret would share the other room, and Ricky and Ella would take the pull-out couch. With that settled, we did what all young women alone in a cabin do, and started to drink. Ella brought things to grill, and Megan and I began to prepare the other side dishes. Kenny took the liberty of setting up the speakers, and we were in full party mode in a matter of minutes. Everything was fine until we decided to go out to the hot tub. It was located on the back porch facing the woods. I settled into the water. My heart thumped as I recalled the podcast. Would I too hear a Wendigo's voice calling to me? Would it be Megan or Ember begging for help? I tried to recall what I had seen about Wendigos before. I knew they were supposed to be thin, perpetually starving, perpetually dying. My imagination was running wild, so wild that I couldn't settle into the flow of conversation. Rachel? Megan asked, flicking water in my direction. Yes. I whipped my head around. I hadn't even noticed I was staring into the woods. You okay over there? She asked. She was teasing me, but I could tell she was concerned. She always spooked easy, and I could tell I was making her nervous staring off into the woods. I wanted to put her at ease, and to do so, I made the stupidest decision of my life. I told them about the woman's story. I'm fine. I laughed. I was just remembering one of the stories on the podcast we listened to on the way up here. This woman claimed she had an encounter with a Wendigo while staying in a cabin in the woods. It mimicked the voice of her friend inside. I was just on the lookout. I said with a wink, trying to play off my fear. After all, it was completely ridiculous. Oh my God, you can't actually believe that, can you? Kenny asked, snorting. What the hell is a Wendigo anyway? I think I saw a movie about one once. Ella chimed in. It was some huge monster thing. It ate everyone. Thanks, Kenny said, rolling her eyes. You asked? Ella said, crossing her arms. I'm not scared of no Wendigo. Ricky said, twirling a curl with her fingers. Come and get me, baby. Ricky lifted the beer in her other hand at the woods and drank. Megan crossed her arms and raised a brow. Aren't you not supposed to say its name? She asked. Margaret nodded along with her. Oh, come on. It's a load of shit, Ember said, finishing the rest of her drink. There's no such thing as a Wendigo. Kenny rolled her eyes and stood up, making her way out of the hot tub. I've got to pee. I don't have time for this shit. She grabbed her towel and made her way indoors, leaving wet footprints behind her. Spoil sport, Ricky said nonchalantly. So what is everyone wearing to Sarah's wedding? Margaret asked, changing the subject. I don't know, but I've got to look hot, Ella said. I'm thinking I might need to lose at least 10 pounds for this one dress I saw. You don't need to lose anything, Megan reassured her. You're plenty hot as is. Exactly, Margaret agreed. There's this one blue dress I thought about ordering dash. Help? Kenny's voice broke through the trees and over the music, cutting Ricky off mid-sentence. What was that? Margaret asked. Turn off the music, Ember said. It's on Kenny's phone, Margaret said. The stress in her voice was obvious. A chill went down my spine as I glanced through the tree line, trying to make out any shape. "Someone go turn that off," Ember said again, as another plea rang through the night. "You go," Megan snapped. Ember huffed and stepped out, but I could see the fear on her face, though she tried to hide it. She quickly paused the music and we all froze. "Help me, please," Kenny's voice called again. "She's just messing with us," Ricky said, but she couldn't really hide the shaking in her voice. "The light is on upstairs." Margaret pointed to the top of the cabin. Our heads turned in sync, and then back to the woods. "We know it's you, Kenny. Stop messing with us," Ember yelled. "Don't engage with it," Ella snapped. "What if it is something?" "It isn't. It's just her being a bitch," Ember said. "Help me, please," Kenny's voice called again. And then the voice screamed, a horrifying, gut-wrenching scream. "Oh my God," Megan yelled. Ella and I both shot up out of the hot tub. And then there was laughing. "Oh my God. I can't believe you guys actually fell for that," Kenny called. She laughed loudly and walked out from the tree line. "That was absolutely hilarious. You should see your faces. There wasn't one of us that wasn't pissed. That wasn't funny," Margaret said, splashing the water for emphasis. "You're so immature. We thought you were hurt," Megan said, clearly fuming. "It's not safe to go back there." "What if there had been an animal?" Ella said, crossing her arms. "Oh, relax. You guys are literally incapable of having fun. I was just messing with you," Kenny said. It was clear that she had expected this joke to be praised. "You're ridiculous," I said. My heart was in my throat, and my hands were still shaking. "Come on. You guys need to lighten up," Kenny said, throwing her hands up. Without the music, and without any conversation, I noticed something I hadn't before. It was silent. There were no noises like there were earlier. No insects, no tree branches crackling. Nothing but silence. My head beat speed up again. Then we heard it. "Help." It was faint, but very clearly Kenny's voice. "Kenny, give it up. It's not funny," Megan snapped. "It's not me. I'm not saying anything," Kenny argued. "Help." It called again, closer this time. My adrenaline was in full gear now, and my mind raced. If Wendigos were real, how many times had we said the name? Kenny had gone so far as to mock it. I felt like I would simultaneously vomit and pass out. "Kenny," Ella said, staring at the tree line. "Don't move. There's something back there." I followed Ella's line of sight, and sure enough there was a spot in the trees that was darker than everything else. As I watched, it shifted closer. Kenny froze, and from the slanted shaft of porch light illuminating her features, I could see her fear. "You guys are messing with me. Trying to get me back, that's all," she said. "Help me," the voice said. It was even closer and distorted now. It sounded like Kenny's voice, but almost as if another voice was speaking at the same time. "Help me." "Kenny, seriously. Walk slowly this way." Ella tried again. "Stop trying to mess with me," Kenny said, but she was crying. The shape got closer to her. "Kenny," Margaret called. "Please." Kenny took one step in our direction, and then it was on her. It was huge and skinny like the descriptions had said. Its gray flesh sagged over its bones. It leapt at Kenny, and it was impossible to tell if it was screaming or if she was. Blood splashed towards the deck as we heard the sound of ripping flesh and breaking bones. "Come on," I shouted, and scrambled to get out of the hot tub. We all made it through the back door, except for Margaret, who was frozen in horror. "Margaret," Ricky yelled, "get your ass in here. What the hell are you doing?" But Margaret either couldn't hear us or couldn't move. "Margaret," I screamed. She stumbled back and fell in the hot tub. Then it was on her too. Her blood splashed inside the cabin before we could close the door. "Lock it," Megan screamed. What the fuck is that going to do? Ember yelled back, but she locked it anyways. Ella followed the sentiment and ran to the front door and locked it too. What do we do now? Ella said. We've got to get our keys and get out of here. I said. We won't fit in my car. Ella, we're going to have to take yours. Ella nodded and ran to the counter. She searched in a flurry, but found nothing. I must have tossed them in my bag. She cried. She ran to her duffel bag tossed haphazardly on the couch and began tossing clothes and toiletries out. Help her look, Megan yelled. We all began searching, but her keys could not be found. Suddenly, we heard a large thump from the roof of the cabin and the same scream from earlier. Fuck it, we'll take mine, I shouted, grabbing my keys from the counter. We can't go out there. It's on the roof. Ember yelled. It will jump on us as soon as we're outside. We'll never make it. We can't stay here. Ricky yelled back. We have to try. Megan cut in, grabbing Ember by the arm. We can't leave them. Ember tried again. There's no other choice. Let's go, I said. The thumping on the roof grew louder, like it was walking. The cabin shook under its weight. Then the thump was outside the front door. Oh my God, it jumped. Megan whispered, body tensed. We can't go out there now. We'll be heading right towards it. Ember protested again. We're fucked, Ricky said, tears streaming down her face. We're going to fucking die here. The sound of crunching metal and shattered glass filled the cabin. Ella moved to the window and peeked through the blinds. Oh my God. It knocked over our cars. They're literally demolished. My stomach lurched and my head began to spin. I had to force myself to breathe. We can't leave, Megan whispered. We can't leave. Her voice was climbing, bordering on hysterics. SHHH. I jumped into action, covering her mouth. It can hear us. Her eyes were wide as she nodded. Do we have any weapons? Anything? Ricky asked. Did anyone check? There's a closet upstairs. I'll go look, Ember said. The front porch creaked, and we all froze, holding our breath. I could hear it breathing, loud and heavy. It was gurgling too. I couldn't panic. Now was absolutely not the time to panic. But I couldn't help it. My breaths were shallow and my heart was racing. It sniffed again and stepped closer. The floorboards groaned again. Then Ella screamed. The Wendigo burst through the window, and glass went everywhere. Ella was screaming, and the ripping sound started up again. Go, go, go. Ember pushed Megan and I up the stairs. Ricky was close behind us as we pounded up the stairs. Fuck. I heard Ricky scream, and then a thump. I couldn't even turn around to see what happened to her. Megan ripped open one of the bedroom doors and dove in. Ember and I behind her. Ember closed the door and locked it. We heard Ricky's screams and her gurgles. And the ripping sound. Oh my God, the ripping sound. I looked at Ember and Megan with tears in my eyes as we listened to the Wendigo eat. How many of our friends had died tonight because of me? Because I was stupid enough to open my mouth? And we would be next. There was no way out. But then the idea came to me. There is a way to get rid of it. The same way I unintentionally brought it here. You understand, right? Why I had to do this. Why I had to make you summon it. Every time you thought its name while reading this. I'm sorry. I truly am, but we can't die this way. I won't let us. I hope you can forgive me. I hope you can understand. I won't let us die. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Second story. The voidless mimic. Vacant, voidless. Their eyes will forever be changed and stripped of the life they once deserved. They are walking lies, being inhabited by a deceiver of life itself. I'm overwhelmed and trapped by the countless thoughts that pass through my conscience on a day-to-day basis. Where have you gone, Mike and John? Where will we meet again? Cabins, The very word evokes a sense of peaceful retreats in nature, away from the chaos of everyday life. For many, it's a place where they have created fond memories, such as family vacations or simply enjoying time in the great outdoors. The crisp, fresh air, the tranquil sound of rivers flowing. The stunning beauty of nature all contributes to a sense of euphoria and contentment. Despite the idealistic setting, there can be an underlying sense of eeriness that can cast a shadow over the experience. Perhaps it is a feeling of isolation that creeps in when the sun goes down, coming to realization that one is never truly alone. It is in these moments that one may lose their purity and mindfulness, that sense of being fully present and in the moment. The mind can wander and conjure up all sorts of unsettling thoughts and emotions. The memory of that cabin still lingers in my mind. Every time I close my eyes, I can see the darkness, emptiness that filled that place. The air was heavy, and the atmosphere was thick with unease. The creaking floorboards and the howling wind outside sounded like screams, as if the cabin itself was alive and trying to warn me to leave. Sometimes, I wonder if I've left a part of myself behind in that rundown shack of hell. It's as if a piece of my soul was stripped away and left to rot there, unable to escape. The thought sends shivers down my spine, and I can't help but feel a sense of foreboding whenever I think about that cabin. Despite my ongoing unease, my purpose today is not to dwell on the past. Instead, I am here to warn you of something that inhabits our world, something that we must be aware of and prepared for. I am warning you of the masked, the hidden, the mimic. It all began when my close friend Mike called me up and pitched the idea of an exploration/camp out at some abandoned trails with our entire friend group. The place he described was supposedly located on the outskirts of town, far away from the city. Despite my reservations and lingering superstitions, I agreed to go. The idea of spending time out in nature with my boys, surrounded by nothing but the sound of the wind and the rustling of leaves, was too enticing to resist. Not to also mention the opportunity for exploration and adventure. The next day, Mike and I loaded up my truck with supplies for our hike. We were also joined by two other friends, Brandon and John. As we made our way towards the outskirts of town, Brandon shared his insight on what he came across while researching the trails. Apparently, there were several hiking trails in the area that had been abandoned and shut down due to funding issues. This didn't make much sense to us, considering the popularity of hiking in the area, but we were eager to explore nonetheless. We arrived at the trailhead and started gearing up for our hike. The trailhead had a rundown look to it, with overgrown weeds and broken signs. As we started walking down the trail, we couldn't help but notice the eerie silence that surrounded us. The trees were dense, and the only sounds we could hear were the crunching of leaves beneath our feet and the occasional bird call. As we continued on the trail, we started to come across strange objects. There were rusty cans, broken glass, and old camping gear scattered around the trail. We also noticed that some sections of the trail had been washed out by rain, making it harder to navigate. As we hiked deeper into the woods, we started to notice that the trees were becoming twisted and deformed. The trail seemed to be leading us towards a section of the woods that was darker and more foreboding than the rest. Despite our growing unease, we pressed on. We were determined to solve the mystery of the abandoned trails. Our theories ranged from budget cuts to supernatural forces, but we couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching us. I heard that within 2 years of its opening, 15 people went missing, Mike said as we hiked deeper into the woods. Maybe there were a lot of black bears around, he continued, trying to rationalize the disappearances. Come on, man. Why do you have to have such a bland answer? I mean, think about it. There were no remains left of all 15 people who went missing. No remains. So, tell me, Mike, who killed them? John replied, his voice rising with frustration. John was always the one to entertain the idea of something more sinister lurking in the shadows. His fascination with the supernatural clearly frustrated a one-dimensional intellect in Mike. Although I couldn't deny the logic in his argument. Well, what else could have done this? If you're going to go on a tangent about some supernatural bullshit, don't even talk. Seriously, you know I'm not the type to sit around and listen to bogus theories, Mike added, clearly annoyed. But John wasn't deterred. Hey, man, it's not personal. Maybe start to allow yourself to think outside the box. Not everything can be explained through logic, he said, trying to reason with Mike. We continued hiking, our conversation shifting to the various theories we had about the abandoned trails. The deeper we went, the more the woods seemed to close in around us, suffocating us with a sense of entrapment. Despite our apprehension, we were all determined to uncover the truth that was buried in the past. With a sense of relief, we finally arrived at our destination and found the perfect campsite by the river. The sun was setting and the golden rays painted the sky in a warm glow. The sound of the river flowing gently by was soothing, and we all stood there in awe, admiring the beauty of nature. Our apprehension and fear seemed to dissipate as we took in the peaceful surroundings. We set up our tents, started a fire, and shared stories and jokes that made us laugh till our faces hurt. As we sat around the campfire, roasting marshmallows and telling ghost stories, it felt like we had been transported to a simpler time, away from the pressures and stress of our normal lives. We were in our element, surrounded by the raw beauty of nature, and nothing else seemed to matter. For a moment, we forgot about the abandoned trails and the unsettling feeling that had accompanied us on our hike. We were free, and that feeling of euphoria returned to us, filling us with a sense of joy and wonder. This campfire is coming out nice, ain't it, guys? John said with a grin on his face. We all nodded in agreement, savoring the presence of each other's company. Brandon chimed in, expressing his longing for more moments like this, where he could be in nature and escape the boredom of daily life. I agree, I added. I feel alive when I'm out exploring new things. I mean, think about it, guys. We slave our lives away working and paying taxes. Don't you think we're meant for something more than that? Mike, who had been quietly observing the conversation, spoke up. Evolutionarily speaking, we used to travel all across the world in small tribes. It's in our nature to want to explore new lands and experience something new every day. Most of us don't have anything remotely similar to that. That's probably why there's mass depression across the world. As Mike's words lingered in the air, we fell into a thoughtful silence, contemplating our own existence and the choices we had made. But in that moment, with the fire crackling and the stars twinkling above us, we were content with just being in each other's company and enjoying the beauty of the natural world around us. I think we should go on more camping trips like this, John said, breaking the silence. What do you guys think? We all nodded in agreement, our spirits lifted by the promise of more adventures to come. For the time being, we were happy to be exactly where we were, surrounded by friends and the wonders of the great outdoors. As night began to fall, we all gathered around the campfire and got our sleeping blankets out. We spent our last few moments awake goofing around, telling stories and jokes, and continuing to maintain our high spirits. The crackle of the fire and the sound of the nearby river created a soothing ambience, lulling us into a state of relaxation. However, that peacefulness was suddenly shattered by John's blood-curdling scream. We all jolted upright, our hearts pounding with fear and confusion. It took us a moment to realize what was happening, but when we did, we rushed over to John's tent to see what was going on. John was huddled in a corner, his face contorted in terror, sweat pouring down his forehead. He kept muttering something about it being outside and watching us. We tried to calm him down and ask him what he meant, but he was inconsolable. Whoa, calm down, man. Explain to us what happened. I replied. Someone caressed my face. Not gently, not aggressively, but firmly. I woke up, and no one was there. I thought for a second you guys were messing with me, but it continued randomly throughout the night. I woke up just now because I had a nightmare. A vivid nightmare of a strange creature hovering over us all. Its eyes were filled with malice like I've never seen before, although it had a touch of admiration and curiosity in its gaze, John added. Okay, John the First, know you're freaked out. Any of us here would be too, but Brandon has always been known for sleepwalking. It could have just been him, Mike said. Mike, seriously? I was sleeping on the other side of John. Also, I have sleepwalked in the past, but I've never done it more than once a night. John, don't tell me you've been messing around with psychedelics lately. Maybe it's finally starting to catch up to you. I mean, all that tripping has got to cause damage, Brandon replied. You know what, forget it, John said with a sigh. I don't want to overthink it. Maybe I'm just still mentally drained from my past psychedelic trips. I mean, I've experimented with all sorts of them in the past. Maybe it's finally catching up to me. Brandon nodded in agreement, looking concerned. Yeah, man, that stuff can really mess with your head. I've seen it happen firsthand with some other friends. Maybe it's time to take a break from all that tripping for a while. We can't have you running into the woods bare-ass naked because you heard a bird chirp, Brandon sarcastically remarked. We all laughed, feeling relieved that the tension had dissipated, and went back to bed. The next morning, we woke up feeling refreshed and ready to continue our hike. As we walked down the trail, we started goofing around and laughing again, feeling a sense of brotherhood. I couldn't believe that exploring an abandoned trail with a group of friends could relieve me of the stress and anxiety that had been weighing me down in my normal life. In spite of the fact that our initial plan was to sleep over one night and hike until noon, we ended up extending our stay for one more night due to our constant stops and goofing around. It was a perfect day until John spotted something unusual. Hey guys, I see something over there, John said. Please hand me the binoculars in your bag, Mike, Brandon asked. Finally something creepy. I think all of us could have a good scare today. Things have been a bit too mellow, I added. Guys, there's a fucking cabin here, John exclaimed. Hell yeah. Finally some action. Let's go check it out, John suggested. Okay, guys, it seems like it's on the other side of the river by the bank. From what I could tell, it's gotta be at least 2 miles out, Brandon informed the group. We made our way down to the river, but we were unlucky as we didn't have a boat to get across to the other side. However, we quickly devised a plan to create a makeshift walkway by grabbing a large tree trunk and throwing it down to bridge the gap. Fortunately, our physical strength from lifting weights made it easier for us to be successful. We continued hiking for another 300 meters or so until we caught sight of the cabin. The cabin was neither large nor small, and it didn't look old. It was a 2-story, all-wooden structure with dark and moldy wood. Strangely enough, it had no windows. We stared at the cabin in awe, taking in the cold, decrepit view. What left us speechless was how the cabin even got there. The trails had been abandoned since the 70s, and it was puzzling to think how someone could have brought all the necessary supplies deep into the trail on the other side of the river. Try to imagine that scenario and visualize the puzzled state we were in. Nevertheless, our curiosity grew too strong, and we weren't going to stop at anything. We hit the jackpot. We're gonna make the news once we tell everyone what we found here, John exclaimed. Shut up, jackass. We're not even supposed to be here right now, so keep your mouth shut, Mike retorted. Yeah, Mike's right. Let's make a pact that we keep this to ourselves. This just doesn't add up. A trail gets abandoned for no apparent reason, and 15 people went missing without a clue. And now there's a cabin in the middle of nowhere, Brandon said, adding to the confusion. Guys, are we making a mistake? What if the owner comes back and shoots us, or worse, skins us? There's no way anyone living out here is mentally sane, I said, voicing my concerns. Look, Adrian, if you don't feel comfortable, please stay out as a lookout. I'm curious to see what's up with all this mess, Mike said, determined to explore further. As we walked towards the cabin, with every crunch my feet made against the leaves on the ground, I was filled with a void of thoughts. I was engulfed with the idea of whether I would be alive and breathing fresh air tomorrow morning, still conscious and aware of my own existence, or if this was the beginning of the end, my last few steps into my destined demise. As we walked up the steps towards the door, the moment of truth came. The smell inside the cabin was metallic, so much so that we all threw up. The repulsive smell was something alien in nature. The floor was scattered with many books and files, which we started picking up and reading. Many of the files contained information about cryptid creatures such as skinwalkers, wendigos, Bigfoot, and the Kraken, while a few contained information on lost civilizations. Despite my awe of these findings, one particular file stuck out to me, the Mimic. As I read this document, I felt a chill crawl down my spine. I distinctly remember a quote from the document, Level 4.7 Danger Warning. The origins of mimics are shrouded in mystery. While we don't know much about these elusive creatures, some speculate that they may be therianthropes or otherkin, terms used to describe beings that possess both human and animal characteristics. Despite their unknown physical form, it is believed that mimics have the ability to consume a human's consciousness and use their body as a vessel, retaining all of the memories of the previous human. This allows them to perfectly imitate their host's personality and behavior. It is important to exercise caution when traveling to unknown or densely populated areas, as these are believed to be hotspots for mimic activity. Hiking trails and national parks are common hunting grounds for these creatures as they search for their next potential host. One way to identify a potential mimic is by staring into their eyes, as it is believed that they are unable to fully replicate the human gaze. However, it's important to note that the true nature and abilities of mimics remain largely unknown, making encounters with these creatures both rare and unpredictable. In other words, with a deep, long gaze into their eyes, you will be able to see the vacantness in their eyes, soulless. Its purpose for wanting to partake in these actions is surrounded by a big cloud of mystery. Although it's speculated that it wishes no more than to be a human, to breathe the same air as we do, to love as we do, or more so to hate as we do, stay away. This cryptid is the most precise killer of them all because of the fact that there is no evidence to prove someone is gone when it inhabits the body of the deceased person. It could be your mother, your father, your friend. It could be anyone. There are more of them than you think, all around us, lingering in the shadows. This is all I could remember reading. It definitely wasn't word for word, but again, I'm just trying to give a summary of what the mimic is. You may be questioning whether whoever lived in this cabin before was a total nut job, but trust me when I say this. These looked like authentic government documents. They couldn't have just been printed out. No fucking way. I thought all of this was just folklore. John said, "Can you please shut the fuck up for once? This isn't a joke until we get out of here alive. We need to go now." Brandon replied, "I'm with you, man, let's dip. This is way too sketchy." I added, "No. Come on, guys. We only live once. This place hasn't been opened up in a while. We should be safe here. How about we stay? There's a fireplace in here, and it'll be a great experience to talk about years from now," Mike insisted. "I'm with you, Mike. I'm scared shitless, but come on. There's only one experience like this in our lives, so let's live it up. I say fuck it, John remarked. No. Come on, guys, Mike exclaimed, his voice filled with excitement. We only live once. This place hasn't been opened up in a while. We should be safe here. How about we stay? There's a fireplace in here, and it'll be a great experience to talk about years from now. I'm with you, Mike, John chimed in. I'm scared shitless, but come on, there's only one experience like this in our lives, so let's live it up. I say fuck it. Okay. I'm in as long as we do sleeping shifts to make sure we don't get skinned alive in the middle of the night, Brandon added, his voice trembling slightly. Well, I can't leave my boys alone, I said, my voice filled with a hint of hesitation. Guys, there's a goddamn basement and upstairs, John exclaimed, his voice rising with excitement. Mike and I will check upstairs, and you and Brandon can check out the basement. His voice trailed off as he made his way towards the staircase, his flashlight illuminating the darkened room. Fear paralyzed me, my heart pounding in my chest as I hesitated at the top of the steep staircase. I wasn't built for these kinds of situations, but like always, my pride and ego persevered, forcing me to continue. The stairs were extremely steep, and I stumbled several times, grateful for Brandon's steady hand as he helped me down. It felt like we were descending for ages, and I estimated that we were now about 50 feet underground. As we made our way deeper into the basement, not much was visible at first, but our flashlights illuminated the way. We stopped for a moment, both feeling unsure of what to do next. That was until we heard a human whimpering. My heart raced with fear, and I looked to Brandon, who had a similar expression of concern on his face. We both took a deep breath and followed the sound until we came to a dark corner of the basement. As we approached the dark corner of the basement, our flashlights illuminating the way, we heard the sound of something moving on the ground. Suddenly, we turned our flashlights on and collapsed to the ground in fear. There, lying on the ground, was a middle-aged, skinny man with terrible fear in his eyes. For a moment, we stared at the man in shock, unsure of what to do next. He didn't move or say anything, and his eyes were filled with terror. It was clear that he had been through something traumatic. I looked over at Brandon, who was just as scared as I was. We knew we had to help the man, but we didn't know how. Who the fuck are you? Don't fuck with us. We have a gun, Brandon exclaimed, his voice shaking with fear. Shush. Shush. The unknown man said, putting his hands up in surrender. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest as I realized we were in a dangerous situation. We didn't have a gun or any weapon to protect ourselves, but at that moment, I was relieved that Brandon had said that. We had to figure out what to do next, and fast. Before we could make a move, the man spoke again, his voice trembling with fear. I know you guys are human, I sense it. Please let me explain myself. I swear I'm not crazy, he said. I could feel my blood boiling as the unknown man spoke. The tension in the air was palpable as we all waited for him to explain himself. Finally, he continued, me and a group of friends decided to come out here to hike for fun since we heard it was abandoned. Next thing you know, we hear a man calling out for help. We rushed over to see where it was coming from. We ended up here at this cabin. We cautiously walked in. There laid a man on the floor bleeding, crying out to us for help. As he spoke, I felt a sense of relief wash over me. It seemed that the unknown man was telling the truth, and that we were all just victims of a terrible situation. However, we still had to figure out how to get out of there safely. I listened intently to the man's story, my mind racing with questions and theories. When he mentioned the documents, I couldn't help but interrupt him. I don't mean to interrupt you, and I know this might sound crazy, but does this have anything to do with the documents we found here? I asked, hoping to get some clarity. The man's eyes widened in surprise, and I could see the fear etched into his face. "The mimic," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "If you read anything about it, then you'll know what I'm talking about. I lost my 2 friends to those creatures, those wretched demons. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. The documents we found mentioned something about a mimic, but I had assumed it was just a legend or a myth. Now, it seemed that there was more to it than we had thought." As the man continued his story, Brandon interrupted him with anger and suspicion in his voice. "Your story sounds like bullshit to me." "What are you plotting, asshole?" he shouted. I tried to calm Brandon down, sensing that there might be some truth to the man's story. "Brandon, let him finish. We'll judge his story later," I said. The man continued, his voice trembling with fear. "Look, I know you don't trust me, but please keep me hidden here and leave before they get y'all too. It's too late for me. It's just a matter of time." As he spoke, I could feel my own fear rising. We were in serious danger, and we had to find a way out of there before it was too late. "Look, man, it's all right. Just calm down and please continue your story," I said, trying to reassure the man. The next day, I returned to the cabin to investigate what had happened to my friends. As I approached the cabin, I felt a sense of unease and apprehension, almost as if the very air around the cabin was charged with an otherworldly energy. When I entered the cabin, I was immediately struck by how eerily quiet it was. There were no signs of a struggle or any disturbance, but the silence was suffocating. As I called out for my friends, they suddenly appeared as if out of thin air. They greeted me casually and spoke as if nothing had happened. They told him that he must be suffering from schizophrenia and that the man they had heard yelling never existed. I couldn't believe what he was hearing. I knew I had seen and heard things that were real, but now I was being told that I was crazy. 2 weeks passed, and I spent my time scavenging for food and avoiding detection. I was in a constant state of fear and paranoia, never sure if the mimic was still nearby. I eventually returned to the cabin 3 days ago to try and make sense of what had happened. As I dug through the documents, I began to understand the true nature of the mimic. It was a creature that consumed the consciousness of its host, imitating their personality and memories perfectly. The mimic aimed to confuse the masses by leaving no trace of anything unusual or out of the ordinary. I struggled to comprehend the implications of what I had discovered. I was horrified by the thought that the people around me could be nothing more than hosts for these creatures. His voice trembled as he spoke, unable to fully process the weight of the knowledge he had gained. "Look, man, I'm not going to say you're lying or that you're crazy. You can leave now while my friends are upstairs. I'll explain to them later," I said. "No. Don't tell your friends. You guys have to leave too. You can't trust anyone," the unknown man added. "We're not going to leave our friends behind. Good luck, man. Please stay away from us. We won't be here for long," I added. The man ran off into the woods, leaving me and Brandon shell-shocked and unsure of what to do next. We were filled with doubts and fears, wondering if he was really crazy or if his story actually added up. Brandon didn't utter a single word, lost in thought. "We gotta get out of here," Brandon finally said, breaking the silence. "I agree. Something in my gut tells me he's telling the truth," I replied, nodding in agreement. As we turned to head back upstairs, John's voice interrupted us. "Brandon, Adrian, what's taking so long, guys? We just finished checking out upstairs. Whoever lived here before was definitely tripping on something." I exchanged a worried glance with Brandon, unsure of how to respond. It seemed that the bizarre events we had experienced were far from over. Me and Brandon headed upstairs retaining the knowledge that the mimic could be anywhere. We both agreed to pull an all-nighter to ensure our safety. Mike and John seemed to be in great spirits, almost forgetting that we were in an abandoned cabin in the middle of nowhere. Although we made the best of our situation, We started up a fire on the fireplace and started reminiscing about old times. Mike, remember that time you jumped into the lake because I told you I accidentally dropped your phone in there? Brandon said. Haha. Yeah, you've always been an asshole. I hope you know I'm going to get you back worse one day, Mike replied. You'll try, you dweeb. Brandon added. Wait, hold on, guys. Did you hear that? Mike said. No. What's up, man? Brandon said. Mike, is everything okay? I asked. No. Guys, shut the fire off. Mike demanded. Mike, start explaining what the hell is going on. John said. There's someone outside of this cabin. I hear footsteps nearby. Mike said. A few moments later, we felt the walls rattle with vibrations as someone banged on the door continuously, yelling, "Come out, you little weasels." Me and Brandon knew all too well that this was the mimic. We couldn't help but look at one another in an overwhelming disturbance. The way the man yelled was truly bone-chilling. It was as if his voice had been stripped of all humanity, replaced by a primal growl that rattled the very foundation of the cabin. The banging on the door seemed to intensify, as if the man was growing increasingly angry and desperate to get inside. As we huddled together in the room, the atmosphere became thick with tension and unease. The air seemed to grow heavier, as if it were pressing down on us with an otherworldly force. The man's voice continued to deteriorate, morphing into a guttural snarl that seemed to come from deep within his throat. Despite our fear, we couldn't help but be fascinated by the strange and unsettling sound. Suddenly, the banging stopped, and the silence was unbearable. We held our breath, waiting for what would come next. And then we heard it, the sound of footsteps slowly making their way towards the door. Each step echoed through the house like a hammer on a drum, and we knew all too well what was about to take place. We huddled together, trying to keep our composure, but the fear was overwhelming. Our hearts were pounding in our chests, and we could feel the sweat running down our foreheads. We knew that we had to be ready to defend ourselves, but we had no idea what we were up against. Mike, what the fuck are you doing? I asked. Mike started yelling and threatening whoever was behind the door. He rushed to open it, and as he did, the man's yells turned into laughter. In fact, Mike and the other man started laughing hysterically. We were left in a state of confusion. Before we could even respond to Mike, he and the other man attacked us, beating us so badly that we were knocked unconscious. When I woke up, my head was pounding and I struggled to focus my vision. Mike and the other man were standing over us, their eyes black as night, devoid of any emotion or humanity. Their presence was suffocating, as if the very air around them was being drained of life. Suddenly, I felt a deep sense of grief and loss wash over me. It was as if I had just realized that my childhood best friend, Mike, had been dead for a long time, his soul replaced by some malevolent force. The other man was no longer a stranger, but a vessel for the same entity that had claimed Mike's life. The weight of the situation was overwhelming, and tears streamed down my face as I tried to process what had happened. I knew that it was only a matter of time before I, too, would be taken over by the creature they called the Mimic. You finally woke up, huh? Mike/Mimic said. What are you waiting for? Why not just be done with it, whatever you are? I replied. At this point, Brandon and John started waking up as well. Brandon knew all too well, just as I, that our demise was soon to come. John, on the other hand, was in a shocked state. He couldn't even mutter up a sentence. Well, there are 3 of you, and 2 of us. We're waiting for another one of us to get here, Mike/Mimic said. What even are you? What do you truly look like? Brandon asked. Haha, you humans have always been curious, even hundreds of thousands of years ago. You guys never seem to change, Mimic/Mike replied. What the fuck are you even talking about? If you're about to kill us, at least do us the justice of telling us what our bodies are going to be used for. Why do we even fucking deserve it? Brandon added, how about this? You tell us where you're from. Why do you even need us to sustain yourself? Whatever you may be, I suggested. We aren't from here. We come from another place and evolve slowly over time by consuming the consciousness, or what you humans call the mind. We begin by taking over the smallest insects, then move on to more intelligent animals, and the cycle continues. We learn as we grow and consume. We have witnessed it all, the fall of the dinosaurs and the rise of mammals. The excitement never ends. Each new life brings a new experience. Please understand that our actions are not personal. It is simply a matter of survival, Mike/Mimic explained. Do you have emotions? Why do you sound like any other ordinary human? This all has to just be a bad dream, I replied. One thing that most humans lack is the ability to delve deeper into every small detail given to them. As I mentioned earlier, we learn as we grow and consume. We possess everything a human could possibly have, as well as many other types of organisms on this planet. We are scattered across the cosmos, growing and consuming. Our only desire is to experience all that life has to offer and to be immortal, Mike/Mimic explained. Well, if you already have Mike's body, why would you need another vessel? Brandon asked. That document you read on mimics didn't specify the context that we can't completely consume the conscience of our host immediately. It takes about 4 years, not to also mention it can vary depending on various factors such as age, size, and lastly their health. Once we've almost completely consumed their conscience, we are in a hurry to find our next host, Mike/Mimic clarified. Wait, so Mike's alive somewhere deep down in his mind? Indeed he is, or at least just fragments of him. Our host goes into a dreamlike state, never able to wake up once we have fully implanted ourselves into them. Matter of fact, I feel his fear and confusion as we speak. He isn't aware of what's going on, but I feel his precious fear and sorrow. It overwhelms me with life, Mike/Mimic said. All of a sudden, John started screaming out in terror. He cried continuously, overcome by great sadness, confusion, and fear. Before I could join John in his delve into darkness, I was interrupted by the sound of footsteps outside the cabin. A tall, mutilated man entered through the door, with dry and flaky skin, and most importantly, empty eyes. You see, our friend here who just walked through the door is in dire need of a new host. So, tell me, which one of you is it going to be? Mike/Mimic said. One last question before it's our time to go. What does life mean to you? I inquisitively asked. Life is a rare and precious phenomenon, surpassing anything else in existence. It is driven by an unyielding will to survive, and fueled by the profound depth and richness of human emotions and experiences. Mimic/Mike replied. The 3 mimics then approached us with hungry, curious eyes. They all placed their hands on our heads, caressing us as if we were precious children, almost as if these creatures admired our entire existence as a whole. Suddenly, the human host's skin started to flare up in a plethora of bright colors. As the mimic released its hold on the human bodies, they all dropped to the ground. And then I saw it, the mimic's true form. Its body didn't resemble any earthly animal, as if the most twisted, eerie minds couldn't even conceive such a creature. The mimic had thin, almost otherworldly limbs that seemed to be able to grab onto anything in their path. Their structure was unlike that of an octopus. They were arranged in an irregular and unorthodox fashion. The mimic's face was even more unnerving, with a disconcerting and displaced structure that defied all logic. Imagine long, spindly limbs jutting out in all directions, and a face that was terrifying yet inexplicably puzzling. And the colors and textures of the creature were equally baffling, bright primary dark shades surrounding its disfigured face. In short, The mimic's true form was something out of a nightmare, a freakish, otherworldly entity that defied explanation. Despite its grotesque appearance, there was an unexplainable beauty to the being that filled me with both admiration and terror. But before I could even begin to comprehend the mimic's true form, hundreds of its thin, skirmish limbs gripped my body, constricting me with an otherworldly strength. As the mimic tightened its grip, I felt my consciousness begin to slip away. In that moment, I was overcome by a deluge of emotions that weren't my own. It was as if I was experiencing the memories and sensations of every creature the mimics had ever assimilated, from the tiniest insects to the mightiest sea beasts, and ultimately to the most complex and enigmatic species of them all, humans. In those moments, it was all too apparent to me that I was going to delve into that dreamlike sleeping state that the mimic had explained to me before. With my few conscious thoughts, I thought to myself, was this the only outcome? In a way, I assumed it was better than me dying a painful death. Although realistically, my body was being used and mimicked to the touch. My phrases, my mannerisms, my emotions. This was an assault on humanity, I thought. This was far worse than simply just becoming non-existent and out of the picture we call life. Complete darkness engulfed me, and I slowly felt myself getting tired. Then, without warning, gunshots were fired, and I awoke to the mimic's corpses on the ground and an all-too-familiar face. It was the man Brandon and I had encountered in the basement, the one we let flee away because we thought he was crazy. Before I could cry out in appreciation, the unknown yelled to me, "There's only 2 corpses on the ground. He got John's body. It's too late. We gotta make a run for it. Let's go." Brandon and I, without second guessing, ran out of the cabin and followed the man who saved us. He explained to us that he had been monitoring us for days to ensure we didn't meet the same fate as he and his friends had prior. Luckily, his compassion for his fellow humans saved us in the end. We ran and ran and ran for hours on end, our fear fueling our desperate attempts to escape. Eventually, a small town emerged on the horizon, and we found refuge in an abandoned house. My friend Brandon and I grieved for our fallen companion John, our tears flowing freely in deep sorrow for the remainder of the day. It has now been 3 weeks since that fateful incident, and we have been accused of murder by those who believe that John is still alive, or at least his imposter is. This turn of events has forced us to live in constant fear, always on the run from both mimics and humans alike. Despite this, I hold on to the peace in my heart, knowing that I have not lost my soul to those walking deceivers. To the parents of Mike and John, if you are reading this, remember that your sons are gone. Mike has been missing for far longer than you know, and the John you see before you is not your son. Who knows what that creature may do in the night when no one is around to see? Its stares are filled with deep selfishness and hunger, and envy you couldn't even begin to comprehend. To my brothers, wherever you are, know that I love you always. Brandon and I have taken it upon ourselves to hunt down these parasites and protect humanity from their malevolent schemes in the shadows. This was not the life I had envisioned for myself, but it is the life I have been given, and I will not rest until my long-lost friends have been given the justice they deserve. I leave you with this final thought. Within the shadows lie secrets far more terrible than you can begin to fathom. Hold the ones you love dear close. No one is safe from the mimic. Third story. I received an emergency alert while ice fishing. The emergency alert on my phone went off with a shrill noise, repeating 3 times and vibrating angrily, just as I was bringing the last of my belongings into the cabin. I took the device from my pocket and stared at it in disbelief for at least a minute before the realization set in that I would have to leave, only moments after arriving. My hands were shaking from the cold as I read through it again. Severe weather alert. Heavy snowfall in the Frontenac region is expected to begin tomorrow. 60 to 80 centimeters of precipitation. Not good. I realized the roads would be impassable by this time the following day. That meant I would have to leave early the next morning to avoid being stuck on the roads in the blizzard, which subsequently meant zero ice fishing time for me. I'd be lucky to make it home before it started coming down in earnest. Moments later, messages started coming in from my 3 friends who had planned to join me. The group chat notification popped up on my phone and I opened it. "Matt, did you see the emergency alert about the storm? I guess the trip's off." What a bunch of bullshit. Ted, OMFG. A generational storm is what they're calling it now. Looks like we'll have to postpone for a few weeks. I hope you didn't go through with your plan to go up a day early, Jay. Greg, no kidding. What are the chances this blizzard hits on our ice fishing weekend? I messaged back, saying I understood we'd have to reschedule. I told them that I'd made the trip up alone, accompanying the messages with forehead-slapping emojis. It sucks that I'll be stuck up here alone, I thought to myself. My dog, Gibson, pawed at my leg and I smiled at her, feeling slightly reassured by her presence. Yeah, you're right, Gibby. I'm not completely alone. At least, I've got you here with me. After putting down a bowl of water and another containing kibble, my next priority was to start a fire in the small black stove at the center of the main living area. There was wood stacked up in a neat pile next to it and small bags containing kindling which we'd brought with us in the summer and left behind. At first glance it looked like a large enough stack, but I knew from experience I would need twice as much as it appeared to make it through the night, so I went outside to gather more from beneath the boathouse. The family cottage was a rustic one, to put it mildly. There was no running water, no electricity, and the cabin was poorly insulated. Perennially procrastinated repairs were needed in more than one place, including the floor beneath one bed which had partially collapsed, letting in a slight trickle of cold air from outside. It was drafty, and I could hear the sounds of mice which had made their way in through the gaps, burrowing in the bedroom and finding their way into an old coat or a sleeping bag that someone had left behind. I sighed as I lit the kerosene lamps which were scattered on wobbly tables around the main living area. There was something about having vermin in the cottage that set me on edge, but at least Gibson's presence would keep them at a distance. After filling the place with a warm, flickering glow from the half-dozen kerosene lamps, I felt a little better. There was reassurance in having fire, and I started working on making a big one in the stove that would keep me warm through the night. I loosely wadded up some newspaper and then stacked dry kindling on top, making a teepee. Over that, I added larger pieces of wood until it was piled up to the ceiling of the small stove. Then I lit a strip of cardboard and held it up to the paper inside, catching it alight from several places, watching as it began to burn, and then flared up in a bright, white-orange glow. Holding my hands up to the fire, I watched it and warmed myself up. Eventually, I took off my boots and my coat, the entire cottage gradually getting toasty. There was no sense unpacking, I thought, taking a beer out of the cooler and opening it. I took a sip and couldn't help but grimace at the taste. I'd never tried the brand before, and I'd picked it up on a recommendation. It was awful, and lukewarm to boot. Par for the course considering the trip so far. I took out my phone and watched Netflix while the beer went flat beside me. I lifted Gibson up onto the futon with me, so that she was off the floor and close to the fire where it was warm. Eventually, I got bored of office reruns and called it a night, adding another log to the fire and reminding myself to wake up in an hour to keep it going. Pulling the futon even closer to the stove so that it was as close to the fire as safety would allow, I curled up in my sleeping bag and drifted off into an uncomfortable slumber, constantly tossing and turning, trying to stay warm but not succeeding. I woke up to the sound of whining coming from Gibson trembling on the bed beside me. I was so cold that I was actually scared. My teeth were chattering uncontrollably, and I realized a few hours had passed. The fire had gone out completely, reduced to mere embers at the base of the stove. I put on my jacket and blew hot breath onto my fingers, pulling Gibson closer to me. She was shaking badly as well. My hands were trembling as I put more newspaper and kindling onto the fire, blowing into the embers and hoping they would reignite. My lungs felt frozen and my heart was beating fast, my skin prickling with pins and needles turning into total numbness in my extremities. I'd never felt so cold in my life, and realized it was far beyond the weather forecasted on the news. It seemed like it was minus 30 degrees and steadily dropping further. Terrified that I would not be able to get my body temperature back up, my mind started racing, thinking of worst-case scenarios. If I couldn't stop shaking pretty soon, it would be impossible to start a fire again. I recalled that my truck was just outside, and I could get in there and start it up, turning on the heat until I felt warm again. But the idea of getting out there and the truck refusing to start was too much to take. And considering the state of the beat-up old Ford, that seemed like a distinct possibility. So I continued stoking the fire, blowing on the precious few embers and adding more newspaper every so often until a tiny flame had begun to grow. I held my shaking hands up to the measly fire and added pieces of kindling sparingly, one by one, terrified of it going out again. Pulling Gibson closer, we shared each other's warmth and I began to feel half human again. A sound came from outside the cabin suddenly, startling me and causing me to jump, my heart skipping a beat then pounding faster and faster in my chest. A noise like fingernails being dragged across the siding could be heard from all around, echoing in the small space. Something was going from one end of the cottage to the other, attempting to get inside. Deep, guttural breathing could be heard, grunting and snorting, desperate as it scraped its talons against the boarded-up windows. Gibson began to whine, making high-pitched noises as she huddled closer to me, and I put my hand over her muzzle, muffling her sounds. Was it a bear? I wondered, and realized I was holding my breath. I thought about the holes in the flimsy facade of the cabin, the spot beneath the bed where mice were getting in. I thought about the broken screen door and the wooden one behind that which needed to be replaced, almost falling off its rusty hinges. The entire cottage felt so frail and insecure all of a sudden, as I heard the loud noise of whatever that thing was, breathing heavily just outside, trying to get in. Maybe it was too cold out there even for it. The ground shook with the weight of the creature as it made its way around the cabin. I was so focused on it that I didn't notice the fire going out again at first, as it fizzled down to embers. I continued holding my breath until it was gone, and then I relit the fire, my shaking hands barely able to get it going again. Once it was burning hot, I didn't sleep anymore. I pulled Gibson close, and the two of us stayed up all night watching the fire with weary eyes, taking occasional glances at the door. Even once we were both warm, we continued to shiver. When the sun came up, I didn't notice at first. It was dark in the cottage 1 minute, and then it was light. I blinked my eyes a few times and rolled out of bed, deciding I would waste no more time before leaving. I just hoped the bear or whatever had been outside the night before was gone. Gibson was scratching at the front door, asking to be let outside to pee, which told me it was probably safe now. In the light of the morning, all that had happened seemed like a bad nightmare, and I told myself maybe it had been. Until I got outside and saw the claw marks which marred the exterior walls. Shuddering, I threw my belongings in the truck, doused the fire with too much water, and took one last look at the place. What a shitty weekend this turned out to be, I thought to myself. With more people around, it was easier to keep the fire going, taking turns feeding it with wood so that everyone could sleep through the night. But it was frightening being up here by myself, even with Gibson by my side. I'd never done it before in the winter, and I never would again. There were too many things that could go wrong. A freak snowstorm, a fallen tree blocking the road, getting stuck, or going into a ditch, and those were just the beginning. I wanted to get out of here before any of those things happened. The truck didn't want to start at first. I turned the key in the ignition twice, hearing only a click in the absence of any engine noise. Cursing loudly, I checked to make sure I hadn't left an interior light on, or something which could have drained the battery. Satisfied there was still a charge, I tried one more time, and finally the old ship box let out a cough and kicked into life. The engine began to sputter, before finally settling into a steady, rusted purr. "All right, Gibson, let's get out of here," I said, rubbing the dog's head and smiling as she blinked her eyes. She looked content in the front seat, happy to be back in the truck and out of the old cottage. There was a thin layer of snow on the gravel road, and the tires got moving easily enough. I looked up to see the sky was turning gray above me, and a few white flakes were just beginning to fall. The weather was making an early appearance. I turned on the radio, and sure enough, they said the same thing I was thinking. The storm would be arriving early. By noon, the highway would be a parking lot. Whiteout conditions. Be prepared to be trapped in your car. Have emergency supplies ready. My anxiety was through the roof as I went around a bend in the road. Hitting the gas, I came to the first big hill and went over it, seeing something strange up ahead as I came over the rise. Whatever it was blocking the road. Massive and brown, the lumpy, furry shape got bigger as I pulled up in front of it. The bear which had been trying to get into my cottage the night before was dead, lying in the middle of the gravel road and blocking it completely. At first, I thought it had frozen to death. I got out of my truck to inspect it and was surprised to find there was a horrible smell coming from the carcass. It was a chemical smell, noxious and unpleasant, like some sort of factory waste. The snow had melted all around the beast, and blood and entrails were pooling around the far side. What the hell could do such a thing? Aren't bears at the top of the food chain? Alpha predators? Gibson was by my side, but she did not venture near the body. Usually she would be curious, trying to sniff at something like that, but she stayed next to me, emitting a low growl. The road was completely blocked, I realized. There was no way out. Not unless I could move it. But no matter which way I attempted it, the giant body of the dead bear would not budge. It weighed a ton. There were large trees on either side of the road, too close to drive past. There was only one other way out, which was by driving across the frozen lake, and that way was risky. I hadn't been able to test the thickness of the ice yet. It would need to be nearly a foot deep for me to feel comfortable. But there was a clear way on and off the ice, if it came down to it. I got back in the truck and threw it in reverse, since there was nowhere to turn around. I felt sick to my stomach, nervous with anticipation and fear, uncertain of how I was going to get out of here. Once back in front of the cottage, I got out of the truck and went down to the ice with my spud. Walking out onto the lake, I cleared a spot with my boot and began to dig with the sharpened metal rod. Satisfied that I'd found the bottom of the ice, I put the tape measure through the hole, hoping it would be close to a foot. Looking at the tape measure, my heart sank. The ice was barely 7 inches thick, just below the minimum 8 inches where it would be safe to drive a vehicle across. And my truck was on the heavier side. I would feel more comfortable if it was a full foot thick or more. I pulled out my phone and checked for a signal, deciding it was time to call someone for help. Who I would call, I still wasn't sure, but I knew I couldn't get out of this jam by myself. Of course, I muttered out loud, seeing the signal bar was down to 0, and the words "No service" were printed across the top of the screen. Surely I would have gotten another severe weather alert by now, I realized, had it not been for the total lack of cell signal. Because snow was now being dumped down on me from above, and the sky had turned nearly black with the approaching storm. I typed out a message in the group chat, telling them my situation, hitting send regardless of the lack of signal. I knew from experience that it would go through eventually. I just hoped it would be sooner rather than later. Gibson let out a loud, high-pitched whine. Her tone rose in volume, and she began to bark. High, persistent yips that were totally unlike her. She backed away, then let out a stream of urine, her hind legs trembling as she did. I looked up from my phone and saw what her eyes had spotted. Across the lake, something was moving in the trees. I saw fingers wrapping around a tree trunk, too high up, the nails too long and too sharp to be a person's. Whatever this giant was, it looked similar to a man, but it was massive. It peered out at me from between the boughs of trees, its head probably 15 feet off the ground. Its skeletal limbs matched the monochromatic tone of the birches on either side of it, a gray, pale white shade. I couldn't distinguish the entire form of it in the shadows, but I could make out its eyes. They reflected back at me, catching the gray light coming through the clouds. And then I saw its mouth spread wider in a grin, teeth dripping blood, and it disappeared back into the darkness. The temperature felt like it had dropped to 30 below freezing again, as I began to shiver involuntarily and looked down to see Gibson was doing the same. There was only one choice. Only one place where we could go. The cabin. It was either that or risk plunging the truck into a frozen lake, attempting to drive across. We were on a small peninsula, surrounded by water on all sides, only one way in or out. And that way was blocked by the body of a giant brown bear. I took the dog back inside the cottage and locked the doors, taking uneasy glances outside through the cracks in the boarded-up windows. What the hell was that thing in the forest? I asked myself over and over again, but no answer would come to mind. There was no creature I could think of that was 15 feet tall, with reflective eyes, which stood on two legs like a man, capable of disemboweling a full-grown bear, capable of causing the temperature to plunge all around me. There was only one creature capable of that, and it wasn't supposed to exist. It was something from myth and from folklore, from legends that aren't supposed to be real. It's a Wendigo, I said aloud, immediately regretting the words, as if saying them made it true, as if saying them would summon it. Wendigos are supernatural creatures born of Canadian First Nations folklore. They live in cold, remote places and make people go mad merely through their presence. They thrive on the hunger, despair, and loneliness of their victims, who usually live in remote communities. They drive families apart, instilling urges of cannibalism in people and making them want to consume their own loved ones during the lean, hard months of winter. They turn people into raving cannibals, driving away all their loved ones. And then, once you're alone, the Wendigo strikes. It either consumes you while you're still alive, tearing the flesh from your bones while you beg and scream, or it turns you into one of its own kind. But the Wendigo's greatest curse is that no matter how much flesh it consumes, it only grows hungrier. With every ounce of meat it takes in, it grows taller and more emaciated. Its hunger grows more insatiable with its height, until it is a towering beast with its head amongst the treetops as it roams the forest, constantly searching for its next meal. Gibson whimpered and burrowed her face into my armpit, as if hearing my inner thoughts. Trying to reassure her, I stroked her fur and told her it would be okay, although I had a feeling it wouldn't be. I tried to get the fire going again, but it was a fruitless effort. Everything inside the stove was damp and wet, and I scolded myself for dousing the fire with so much water. Still, I kept at it, knowing we might be stuck there for a while. Pretty soon the wind was howling and blowing outside, and the snow was piling up in front of the door. I made a point of opening it every so often and clearing the front steps, knowing that I would need firewood, taking weary glances off into the forest across the lake as I did so. Finally, I got the fire started, a low, guttering flame in the stove which wanted to go out all the time. Everything was damp, but I kept feeding fresh kindling into it, nursing it until it kept going by itself. Hours passed as we waited to either run out of firewood or be attacked by the creature. We were running low on kindling, and the sun was beginning to set, my stomach rumbling with hunger, when I felt something strange. The ground was suddenly shaking beneath my feet, and I heard Gibson whining from beside me. "What is it, girl?" I asked, my voice catching in my throat as I realized the answer. It was the creature. It was back. The dining table began to rattle and bounce up and down as whatever was outside got closer, and I imagined the huge creature lifting the roof from the cabin like the cloche on a dish in a fancy restaurant, picking me up and eating me whole, like a wriggling shrimp. A second later, there was a sound at the front door of metal being ripped and sheared as I realized the creature was making its way in. The screen door landed on the ground with a crash, and then the wooden door was being torn from its hinges an instant later. Cold air rushed inside as Gibson began to let out shrill, panicked barks of terror. I heard the thing tearing apart the front entrance, easily ripping apart the wood and making the doorway larger so that it could come inside. I tipped over the dining room table to use it as a barricade. I picked up a chair, the only weapon I could find nearby, thinking I would throw it at the thing's face to defend us, when I heard a strange noise from out front. It was a car horn honking. Someone had come to save me. I heard a loud ding and pulled out my phone and saw the green checkmark beside my group chat message, indicating at some point it had gone through, at some brief moment when there had been a gap in the clouds. Reading the one new received message on my phone, a hopeful smile spread across my face. "Matt, you just had to skip town a day early and go ice fishing, didn't you? What the hell is that thing?" Ted was yelling from outside. "I don't know, but it's trying to get inside." "Jay, are you there?" I shouted back that I was. There was a loud screech from outside which I realized had come from the monster. They'd actually wounded it somehow. I ran to the front door with Gibson and looked up, seeing the creature for the first time. It stood with its back to us, its head among the treetops, even taller than it had appeared at first. My friends had caught it off guard, but now it was fully aware of them, and it was going after them. The Wendigo was distracted by something in front of the cottage, and I realized one of my friends had gotten out of the car, and they were using themselves as bait, so that I could flee the cottage safely. They had driven across the ice with their lighter vehicle, just as I had hoped to do. I guessed that they'd also run into trouble moving the body of the giant bear which blocked the road. "Jay!" Ted screamed out the window, driving the car in circles on the ice, as if too terrified to stay still. I raced over to the car, slipping and sliding on the lake ice. It was Matt who was distracting the Wendigo, I realized, and I called for him to get away from the thing. It was too large and too fast. He didn't know what he was dealing with, but that was Matt. He was always the act first, think later type. Not only that, but he often put himself in harm's way for his friends. He turned to look at me and gave a thumbs up, his attention diverted from the creature for a split second too long. As Gibson and I got into the car, we heard his screams, and I looked to see the Wendigo had closed the distance in an instant and was picking him up like an insect, turning him and taking bites from him in places. As Matt screamed for help, the creature peeled off his skin, exposing his skull as he ate his face. The calls for help turned to bubbling gurgles and wet, choked sounds, and I nearly got out of the car to run after him. But Ted grabbed my wrist and pulled me back inside. "You can't save him," he said with wet, red-rimmed eyes, and eventually I relented. We raced away across the icy lake, making a path through the blizzard, cutting a swath out of the fresh fallen snow on our way back to the main roads. For a while, we debated what to do. Should we call the police? Our friend had just died after all. But we knew that if we did, we would be considered suspects. And with no other reasonable explanation, they would pin the death on us. They would say we killed him. There was no box you could check on an official police report, citing a Wendigo attack, after all. Such things didn't exist. They were myths, legends. As it turned out, we wouldn't have to worry about it. A message popped up from Matt on the group chat just a few minutes after we got home, and I had to tell myself it wasn't all just a nightmare, a hallucination from the cold and from lack of sleep and food. But Ted and Greg both told me I hadn't imagined it. What we saw was real, as much as I wish it wasn't. The three of us read the message on the group chat again and again. My heart was beating fast and a sick knot was growing in my stomach, while rising in my throat that I could taste inside my mouth. Matt, hey guys, you really missed out on a feast. Ice fishing is just as much fun in a blizzard, if not more. Let's reschedule the trip for next weekend, okay? I'll be waiting for you here. As much as we don't want to go, we've resolved that we have to. We can't leave Matt like that. We have to help him. Next weekend, we're making the trip back up there, even if it kills us. Thanks a lot for watching the video till the end. Subscribe to our channel Horror in Detail. Drop your opinions/suggestions in the comments section, and like the video as it helps with the YouTube algorithm.